It begins, as most nightmares do, quietly. Spring of 1946. The Second World War had just ended. American soldiers were coming home. Cities were celebrating. Families were reuniting. The country was exhaling after years of grief and sacrifice, and in the small border town of Texarkana, life felt simple, safe, and ordinary. Texarkana sits on the state line between Texas and Arkansas, literally split down the middle, one side Texas, one side Arkansas. Two police departments, two sets of laws, one town. It was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, where teenagers parked on lovers' lanes and watched the moon, where nobody imagined that something ancient and evil was already crouching in the shadows waiting. Between February and May of 1946, a masked killer would terrorize this town so completely that residents bought guns in record numbers. Police slept in shifts, and people barricaded themselves inside their homes after dark. 5 people would be murdered, 3 more left wounded and traumatized, and the killer, known only as the Phantom, would never be caught. Not then, not ever. Jimmy Hollis was 24 years old. Married Jeanne Larry was 19. They were young in love, and doing what young couples did on quiet nights in 1946. They had parked their car on a secluded road on the outskirts of town. It was late. The night was still. Then a figure appeared out of the darkness. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and his face was hidden behind what witnesses would later describe as a white cloth mask, with crude holes cut out for his eyes and mouth. He moved with confidence, with purpose, like a man who had done this before. He ordered them out of the car at gunpoint. What happened next was brutal, and I'll spare the most graphic details. But Jimmy Hollis was beaten savagely, pistol whipped across the skull with such force that his injuries were life-threatening. Mary Jeanne Larry was assaulted and terrorized. But here is the thing that would haunt investigators for decades. He let them live, whether by choice or by interruption. The Phantom melted back into the darkness. Jimmy and Mary Jeanne stumbled for help, blooded and barely conscious, their screams swallowed by the empty Texas night. When police arrived, there was nothing. No footprints, no shell casings, no witnesses, just the road, and the dark, and the lingering sense that something had changed in Texarkana forever. 1 month passed. Residents whispered about the attack, but without a murder, without a name to put to the fear, life slowly crept back toward normal. Maybe it was a one-time thing. Maybe he was gone. He wasn't. On the night of March 24th, Richard Griffin, 29, and Polly Ann Moore, 17, were found in Richard's car on a remote road, another lover's lane. They were both dead. Polly had been shot once. Richard had been shot twice, at close range, execution style. The car was eerily undisturbed, no sign of struggle, no indication they had tried to run. It was as if the Phantom had appeared so suddenly, so silently, that they had no chance to react. The town woke up. This was no longer a single violent night to be whispered about. There was a killer in Texarkana. A calculating, methodical killer who wore a mask and hunted in the dark. Texas Rangers were called in. Arkansas State Police mobilized. Local officers began working around the clock. But in 1946, forensic science was in its infancy. There was no DNA analysis, no digital surveillance, no way to trace a bullet back to a specific gun without having the weapon in hand. Investigators had victims. They had crime scenes scrubbed clean by a careful killer. And they had almost nothing else. 3 weeks later, the Phantom struck again. Paul Martin, 17 years old. Betty Jo Booker, 15 years old. They had spent the evening at a dance, the Rhythmaires, a local jazz band, and had driven out to a park afterward. By morning, they were both dead. Paul's body was found on a road a distance from the car, suggesting he had tried to run and been hunted down. Betty Jo's body was discovered miles away. She had been shot 4 times. The town didn't just wake up this time. The town panicked. Hardware stores sold out of guns and ammunition within days. People who had never owned a firearm in their lives were purchasing shotguns and pistols and rifles. Women refused to leave their homes after sunset. Men sat in their living rooms with weapons across their laps, listening. Hollywood took notice. A local newspaper coined the name that would follow this case into history: the Phantom Killer. The story made national headlines, and still no arrests, no suspects, no face behind the mask. Virgil Starks was a farmer. He was 36 years old, and on the evening of May 3rd, he was doing something millions of Americans were doing at that very moment in 1946. He was sitting in his living room, reading a newspaper. The farmhouse sat on a quiet rural road. His wife, Katie, was in the bedroom. At approximately 9 p.m. a rifle shot pierced the window and struck Virgil in the back of the head. A second shot followed immediately. Virgil Starks died in his chair, newspaper still in his hands. Katie heard the shots and rushed to her husband. Before she could fully understand what had happened, shots came through the window again, hitting her twice in the face. By some extraordinary miracle of survival, Katie Starks did not die. Bleeding severely, barely conscious, she crawled through her house, out a door, and to a neighbor's home for help. When police arrived at the farmhouse, they found blood. They found shell casings from a .22 caliber rifle. They found evidence that the killer had stood outside the window and watched, perhaps for several minutes before firing. He had not used a handgun this time. He had not engaged up close. He had watched a man through a window, in his own home, in his own living room reading a newspaper, and he had shot him dead. The message was clear, and it was devastating. Nowhere is safe, not even your own home. The pressure on law enforcement was immense. Texas Ranger Captain Manuel Gonzalez, a legendary figure, a man who had worked some of the most dangerous cases in the Southwest, was leading the investigation. He set up a mobile headquarters. He flooded the region with officers. He organized massive manhunts. He interviewed hundreds of people. He followed countless leads. Nothing what investigators did know painted a picture of a highly organized killer. He chose his locations carefully: remote, dark, secluded roads with clear escape routes. He left almost no physical evidence. He struck and vanished. He was physically powerful, methodical, and clearly familiar with the terrain around Texarkana. He appeared to know when to come. And more chillingly, he appeared to know when to stop, because after the attack on the Starks farm, the Phantom Killer was never definitively heard from again. No more attacks came. No more bodies appeared. The town waited, nerves shredded, guns loaded, curtains drawn, and the Phantom simply faded back into the dark from which he came. Investigators eventually focused on one man, Yoel Swinney, a small-time criminal and car thief living in the area. His wife, Peggy, told police in stunning detail that Yoel had committed the attacks. She described specific details of the crime scenes that had never been made public. There was just one problem: a wife cannot testify against her husband. Not in Texas in 1946. The laws at the time made Peggy's testimony inadmissible in court. And without her testimony, prosecutors had no case they could take to a jury. Yoel Swinney was eventually convicted not of murder, but of car theft. He was sentenced to life in prison as a habitual offender. He was released in 1973, having never been charged with a single one of the Texarkana murders. He denied involvement until the day he died. Peggy, who had given that damning account to investigators, later recanted significant portions of her statement, and so the door on the most definitive answer closed. The Phantom Killer case became one of the most studied unsolved murder cases in American criminal history. In 1976, it was adapted into a film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown, which was itself so disturbing that it became a cult classic, the kind of horror that works precisely because the audience knows it is rooted in something true. But here is what sits at the center of this story, the thing that makes it linger long after you've finished reading about it. The Phantom Killer operated for 83 days. He attacked at least 8 people. He killed 5 of them. He terrorized an entire region. He operated under the noses of some of the most capable law enforcement officers in the South. And he walked away free. He lived the rest of his life whoever he was, breathing free air. Perhaps he worked a regular job. Perhaps he had a family. Perhaps he sat at dinner tables and shook hands at churches and went to sleep in a bed like any ordinary man. And somewhere in his mind, he carried what he had done in those spring nights of 1946 on those dark Texas roads. With his white mask and his cold, deliberate patience, the town of Texarkana never quite forgot. To this day, the case remains officially open, classified as an active investigation by local authorities, though in truth, the evidence has grown cold over 8 decades and the witnesses are long gone. Who was the Phantom Killer? Was it Joel Swinney, the man his own wife condemned? Was it someone else entirely, someone who was never even looked at, someone who moved through those investigations invisible? Or, and this is the thought that keeps true crime researchers awake at night, was he never from Texarkana at all? Could he have been a drifter? A transient who passed through, left devastation in his wake, and continued on into the vast American landscape, leaving no trail, carrying his secret until it died with him? We don't know. We may never know. What we do know is this: in the spring of 1946, something came out of the dark in a small American border town. It wore a white mask. It moved without sound. It killed without mercy. And when it was done, it simply walked back into the night, and the night kept its secret. The Texarkana Moonlight murders remain unsolved to this day. If you love stories like these, please subscribe for more.